So I'm Lily Wen. I'm assistant professor in Jalisco Data Science Institute with affiliation in CSE department. And today I'd like to share with you some of very exciting results in my lab, how we can bring interpretability and further improve interpretability in deep learning. So we know that neural networks are everywhere. People use it in computer vision. For example, you can do image classification, object detection, segmentation, and pedestrian detection. It's also been widely used in natural language processing and speech. For example, you can see this Google Translate is used for machine translation, text classification, and speech recognition. And it's actually been widely used beyond the traditional artificial intelligence field. For example, in medicine and biology, people can use it to detect cancer cells, to do the diabetes grading, and drug discovery. And in security and defense, people use neural networks to do face detections, video surveillance. Moreover, in finance, you can also use it to detect fraud, trading, and perform financial services. Perhaps not surprisingly, in robotics, neural networks are also heavily used in manipulation and motion planning. And here are some more famous neural networks. For example, this AlphaGo agent, which has already defeated the human world champion. We can also use it for predicting structures. And I'm sure everyone knows this large language model, ChatGPT. It's also powered by neural networks. However, despite the success of neural networks, one question I want to ask is that are they safe and trustworthy? Furthermore, why do they perform so well? So I lead the Trustworthy Machine Learning Lab at UC San Diego. Here are two questions that my lab tried to answer. First, are deep neural networks safe and trustworthy? This is in the area of robust machine learning, where we have developed the first neural network robustness score. And we are also one of the very first team to develop the robustness certificate for the neural networks. So this includes the worst case certificate, probabilistic certificate, and also semantic certificate. We also contribute to the line of robust learning, where we want to learn neural networks that are robust to all kinds of perturbations. And finally, we also try to evaluate the vulnerability of neural network in terms of attacks. So for example, we try to attack the DeepRL agent, and more recently, also try to attack the large language models. And the second question that my lab tried to answer is, why do neural networks perform so well? And this is in the area of interpretable machine learning, where this is basically the main focus in my talk today. I'll talk about a few approaches that we can try to interpret deep neural network models in vision domains, in language domains. We can also try to build an interpretable neural network by design. So this also applies to vision models and also language models. And we also, this is in collaboration with my colleague Bert Houston, we also try to evaluate, find a blind spot of the machine learning model through recourse verification. Finally, with the tools that we developed, the interpretability tools, now the neural network training process is no longer a black box anymore. So with the interpretability tools, you can enable transparent learning. Okay. So today I'll focus on the interpretable machine learning work to share with you some of the advanced, the research work, try to answer why neural networks perform so well. Okay, so neural networks are still considered as black box model because it's hard to understand how they work. So this is a joke saying that although the machine learning system works very well nowadays, but we still don't know how it works. It just works. And perhaps one reason is because the neural network that we are trying to use is not as simple as you see here. So this is a simple, shallow, fully connected network. In reality, what we are trying to use is a very wide, very deep neural networks and consists of very complex architectures. So you can see that this is even too complex for us humans to look into. So let me take a step back. Why is it important to understand neural networks? You might wonder. And I argue that interpretability is crucial to enable trustworthy AI. So with interpretability, we can build trust. With interpretability, user will trust a system more if they can understand it. And this is especially important for high-stakes domains. For example, in self-driving, in healthcare, and for example, in the hiring decisions, if you're using neural networks to do the hiring decisions. And interpretability can help safety. So with interpretability, now we can easily evaluate and monitor the capabilities of the learned models. And we can understand their failure modes and when we can safely deploy them. Interpretability also helps transparency. So with interpretability, now we can look into the models and detect whether there are biases and also facilitate easily debug for human researchers. For example, we can edit existing models to fix issues. This will be also one of the use cases I will show you in our work. Last but not least, interpretability can help us to design better models. For example, with interpretability, now we can gain insight on how and what our models has learned and help us to design better models and training methods. And so this is also one of the focus of my talk today. Okay, so in this talk, my goal is to share with you how we can demystify and design neural network models with interpretability. This includes the shallow, fully connected networks, also includes, covers the deep neural networks. So the first part of my talk, I will share with you the methods that we are developing for interpretability tools to understand how neural networks operate. And this fits the goal that we can enable trust, safety, and transparency. And particularly, I'll talk about our ICLR work on ClickDissect, which is a tool that can enable automatic descriptions of neural representations in deep vision models. And this is with my PhD student, Thomas. The second part of my talk, I will share with you how we can develop systematic methods to learn interpretable neural networks. So this fits the goal that we can design better models and further enable trust, safety, and transparency, as I will show you in the results. And particularly, I will share with you on this another ICLR work on label-free concept automatic models. And this is again with my student Thomas and my wonderful collaborators, Subo and Lim. And the last part of my talk, I hope I still have time to share with you our more recent work, how we can develop better interpretability tools, for example, the linear explanations for individual neurons, and also how we can interpret neurons in neural networks using the help from language models. Another work I hope to have time to cover is more recent work that we enable to ensure the faithfulness of learning these interpretable models. So that's the VLG-CVM. And also the more exciting results that we can design these interpretable large language models to ensure safety. So that is our recent research ICLR work. Okay, so here are the fundamental questions that I want to answer in this talk. First, how do we define the interpretability metric? Second, once we define the interpretability metric, how do we compute them efficiently? Third, how do we use this metric to design interpretable models? So the first part of my talk, the first questions to define an interpretability metric. So one common approach is to base on individual input explanations, where the idea is that given a neural network F, I have some input. So let's say our applications is in vision domains. So you have this input image X0, and you input to this neural network, and this network tells you that it's a pickup prediction. So this type of interpretability, they try to ask the question, why does the model F predict the input as a pickup? And so these are known as the feature attribution methods. So one of the famous approach is to use saliency map to highlight what is the most important pixels in the input X0 to explain the predictions. So for example, that's something you can see here. And there have been many research efforts along this line. I'm sure some of them you might have already heard of. For example, like smooth grad, integrated gradient, gradient input, gradient cam, and so on. And so this is kind of the result it produced from different methods. And as you can see, it requires very subjective evaluation and hard to compare. Furthermore, it tells very little to us on how the model is working. It only tells you that what the model is looking at the input. So what is the sensitive part of the input to the output prediction. So this is not very desirable. Alternatively, there's another way to define interpretability at the model level, or we call this neuron level, instead of the input level. So this type of approach is works as follows. So given a neural network F, this type of approach asks the question, what is the role of each neuron inside this neural network? And the idea is to use the concepts to describe what's the functionality of each neuron units in the neural network F. So for example, we said that this neuron, this blue neuron is a gymnastic neuron because it's highly activated on the gymnastic related input. And we said that another neuron, the green neuron, is a broccoli neuron because it's highly activated on broccoli related images. So this is very similar to how neuroscientists trying to understand our human brains. Because if you recall, our human brains is also very high perform, very successful neural networks. And neuroscientists trying to understand the neural networks by trying to figure out what is the functionalities of the neurons. Okay. So what is the challenge of this type of approach? Okay. So there have been a lot of although comparatively less than an input feature-based method, but there's indeed some research effort trying to understand it, including also some famous work from OpenAI. So this is known as the mechanistic interpretability, where they largely based on manual inspection. So the idea is that they will have some human researchers to look into the neurons, and to look at what is the highly activated input, and trying to interpret what's the functionality of the neurons. So for example, in OpenAI's work, they also show that they have the Spider-Man neuron, where you have a neuron that is highly activated by all kinds of Spider-Man related inputs. But as you can imagine, since our neural network is very deep, very large, and there are so many neurons out there, and it could be very time consuming and very hard to scale if you need to have human researchers to look into it. So this is not very desirable. And so in order to address this issue, there are some recent works from MIT. They try to automate the descriptions of the neurons. So instead of having human researchers to look into it, They try to develop algorithms that can automatically tell you what is the descriptions of the neurons. And their approach requires the concept label data. And as you can imagine, if we require the concept label data, then it also involves non-trivial human research, human efforts. So it could still be very time consuming, and they also have several other limitations. For example, some of the work requires training, so this will add additional cost. So let me take a step back to try to think about why do we really care about interpretability tools? So imagine if you're a user or developers, what kind of interpretability tools will be useful for you to understand the neural networks? And I argue that the first important property is that it should be fully automated and scalable. So for example, in the prior work that requires collect the concept annotations, like the pixel-wise concept annotations, that could be very time-consuming and very expensive. Furthermore, if they want to incorporate new concepts, that requires new labels, so new collections. The second property is that the interpretability tools should work for various neural network architectures. So it should be compatible to not the neural network, for example, that's commonly used, like convolutional neural networks, fully connected networks, but also more state-of-the-art neural networks like vision transformers. And maybe further, there are some other new architectures. Okay. So the key question here is that how do we develop such a tool? Okay. And that would be the second part, the second fundamental questions that I want to answer. But before that, I want to see whether there are some questions here. I saw there's a chat. Yes.
How can we, like, what the way of attributing a concept to a neuron doesn't really make sense to me. Because like, how can we like call this like the Spider-Man neuron? Maybe it activates for like Spider-Man and like 4 other things, or maybe it gets activated by like the background of Spider-Man pictures. Like, why can we like logically say that something is like a neuron related to only a single concept? It doesn't really make sense to me.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So for example, that's unfortunately, that's also kind of the works that they try to define the interpretability, that they're basically saying that these are the inputs highly activate for that neurons. So one way to address your question is that because they also look at the activation map. So then you can see that what is the input part, whether that is the backgrounds or that's the Spider-Man itself. So that can partially address the question you have. There's also more recent work they're trying to kind of eliminate this spurious correlation. Let's say you have this common thing for Spider-Man, but maybe there's also some other concept. But they will also look at lowly activated images. And if that consists of Spider-Man, then maybe the Spider-Man is not the right concept. But indeed, kind of defining a well-defined definition for the interpretability is still some active research area. Yeah, but we need to some kind of definition to start developing the tools. Okay. So one question say that does this change depending on? Okay, so I guess the question is asking whether the tools will change, the method will change, depends on it's fully connected network or convolutional network. If that is the case, so the method will not change. So the method will work automatically. So it will be compatible. But along if your questions are others, then maybe you can elaborate more, and then I will move on first. So let me get into our first work, so the clip dissect. So we are trying to automate this process and then to address the limitations of the prior work. So this is an overview of clip dissect, and I'll talk about the details shortly. So they have 3 inputs, and this is the steps in the clip dissect. you will get the outputs, the descriptions of the neurons functionality. Okay. And the benefits of quick dataset is that it's concept annotation free. It doesn't require training, so it's training free. It can allow unrestricted and open vocabulary concepts. It's also efficient and scalable. So what is the key ideas? So given a network of interest, we perform the following steps. First, in order to understand what's the functionality of the neurons, we try to look into what is the neuron patterns. So we'll first record the neuron patterns, and then with the neuron patterns, we want to decode the patterns. Okay, so given a network F, suppose I want to understand this neuron, so I denote it as f of k, fk. And so I will have a probe image, the probing data set, xi, and I use this to probe my neurons to look at what is the activations. So I have this activation vector, qk, that is specifically for this neuron k. And once I have this qk, then I will find the most appropriate concept t star that will best describe the neuron patterns qk. Okay, so this can be formulated as an optimization problem where we want to maximize the similarity between these activation vectors and also the concept vector. So there are some possible similarity functions. For example, you can design the cosine similarity where you define the similarity between the activation vectors and the concept vector. So you can define this concept vector CT on the probe, for example, by human labels, or as we'll show by the clip model. In the literature, people also define this weighted point-wise neutral information as the similarity functions. So the idea is that you will try to characterize, you will first define the highly activated inputs and use them as the exemplar set. And you want to describe what is the descriptions of the common patterns of the exemplar set, so that's BK. And you also want to penalize the descriptions that too commonly appear in the images. For example, there might be some common sentence like, this is like an image, this word basically appears in all inputs, and you want to penalize that description. And for that, what we show here is that all these terms can be approximated using the clip model. Yes.
How do you have a point-wise mutual information with QK without any term involving Q?
I will show you in the next few kind of animations. So we'll show that how we can calculate this term. So this actually, so BK includes Q, and then all these terms is a function of Q. Yeah, that's a good question. Okay, so if you're not familiar with clip model, this is a structure of clip model. So clip model is a kind of a very nice approach that allows open vocabulary classification. So basically consists of an image encoder and text encoder. And what we are trying to use here is that we will feed the concept set to the text encoder and feed the probing data into the image encoder. And so we'll have this clip product, this matrix, we call this concept activation matrix P. Okay, and then so what we show in the paper is that you can try to use a clip to define this concept vector. So for example, CT will just be the column of this concept activation, because you can imagine that each concept words, each column signals how this concept activates on each probing image. And related to the previous question, in the WPMI, you can use this, we show in the proof that you can express this first term in terms of the clip matrix. And also the second term is also a function of the clip matrix. Okay, so now let me deep dive a little bit into what's the contents of the clip set. So input will have this concept set. So this is a set that can be assigned to the neural descriptions. This can be any list of text descriptions. So that's why we can allow this unrestricted concepts. We also have this probing data. So this is a set of images used to understand how each neuron behaves. This can be any collections of images and do not need any labels. So that's why this is concept annotation free. Lastly, is the network you are interested to understand. So our approach works for any network architectures, including CNN, vision transformer, fully connected networks. Okay. So click dissect, once we have the input, then click dissect runs in 3 steps. So first, you'll record the activation patterns over the probing data. And then we'll compute this concept activation matrix P using clip, as I described in the quick idea. And so each column of P denotes the activation patterns for a single concept. And then we'll compare the activation patterns of neuron K with those concept vectors using similarity functions. And this neuron K will get the concept with the most similar activation patterns, so you maximize the similarity. And in this work, we find that the similarity function is actually crucial to generate the good neuron descriptions. And in particular, we compared 4 different similarity functions. So the cosine similarity I described, we can also define the ranking similarity, the weighted mutual information, and also the soft version of this. And we find that the theoretically inspired the soft WPMI to perform the best. For example, this is a ResNet layer for a neuron. And if you use the cosine similarity, it tells you it's a cabinet, but you can see that it doesn't look quite right. Doesn't fit the highly activated input. While the soft WPMI tells you it's a nursery neuron. Okay. And so with these steps, the output of the algorithm is the text descriptions of the role of the neurons. And our method can detect diverse and complex concepts, for example, the abstract concept of the gymnastic neurons and also other neurons. So let me show you more results. So for example, here's a ResNet model. So ResNet consists of 4 major building blocks. You can use the tool to interpret the neurons, let's say in the first layer. We find that there's distract neurons, vector neurons. We also find there's the speedy neurons and greyhound neurons in the layer 4. And more generally, you can build a full profile of your neural networks. Let's say we look into different layers. Yes.
So what specifically is the similarity function applied to? Like, what are the specific inputs for a given neuron to that similarity function?
Yeah, so that will be the activation vector QK and also the concept vector C.
But the concept vector, like, this is a vision network. How can like words be put through the?
So that's why we use the clip structure, right? So you have the clip text encoder. So each concept is fit into the.
So the text is like encoded as an image or like an input image?
The text encoder is only input of the concept. So it will encode.
Oh, I see. So you have a mutual input size between the text and the images.
Yeah, so we have the clip product. That's the product between your image embedding and also your text embedding. So that's how you associate the concepts there.
But how are you doing that for a specific neuron? You take like the embedding at a specific layer?
Yeah, so if you remember, firstly, we will record a concept. So that's the QK. So that's the QK term here. And the TN is basically saying that what is the concept of the concept words and the text embedding. And so that will basically, the TN is a clip product. So that will be the text, the concept vector there. So that will be that particular concept on the probing data. So you can imagine that that's why we need the probing data, because the probing data serves as the tool that you understand what's the neuron patterns. That's the QK. And then you also get what's your concept vector.
Wait, so TM is the product of the probing data and the concepts? I thought TM was the probing data and QK was the concept.
No, so you can see that. So TM is here. So basically, if it's just the cosine similarity, then it's basically TM is the CT. Yeah. So CTM is basically the clip product over the probing image embedding to the text embedding. We can talk more offline if you have more questions.
Got it, that
Yeah,
makes
but
sense.
let me move on. Yeah, so basically, using a clip structure, cosine similarity is just the column of the concept activation matrix. But if you are using a WPMI, it's actually more involved. Okay, but still a function of the concept activation matrix. Okay, so we can use this to build a full profile. And then what I'm showing you here is that I will try to plot what's the most frequently appear concepts in each layer. Okay, and then let me show you a little bit more qualitative results. So let's say we pick the random neurons from the ResNet trained on ImageNet. So this is the highly activated image for the neuron 46 in the layer 1. And ClickSSA can identify correctly it's the striped neurons. Well, say other methods say think it's like a waffle neurons, so it doesn't quite right. Say it's a spot of the color white, that is also not quite right. So we also see, for example, we can identify the abstract concept like graduating neurons. And there's also other neurons in another network, ResNet 18, trained on the place 365. So there's more this kind of auxiliary concepts like a frontal neurons, ethic neurons, auditory neurons. You can also use this to understand, for example, the MLP layers for the vision models, the vision transformers. So, for example, we find that there's these highways neurons, auditory neurons, and furnished neurons. Now, for more quantitative results, so we perform two quantitative analysis. First, we'll have the large scale evaluation on the human raters. So we ask the human raters whether the descriptions match the highly activated images and whether they agree or disagree. So if they disagree, they will give a score of 2, strongly disagree a score of 1. If they agree, they will give a score of 4, and then strongly agree of 5. So you can see that ClickSSA outperforms other baseline, but it's still not very satisfactory. So you can see that it still has some gap to the agree, like a score of 4. And that's something we try to address in the follow-up work where we can provide higher quality of descriptions. And you can also do this more automatically evaluation. For example, if you look at the final layer, then the final class is the concept. And so you can calculate what is the accuracy. And so ClickSSA can improve around 50% of the accuracy with the final layer prediction descriptions. On the other hand, ClickSSA is also very fast. So if we want to label all the neurons in the 5 layers of ResNet 50, so there's roughly 4,000 neurons, then it took roughly 4 minutes for one single GPU. For other methods, it's roughly 10 to 200 times slower. So this is also another benefit of ClickSSA. Okay. So just to sum up, ClickSSA has the following benefits: and provide high quality neuron descriptions. It's computationally efficient. It's also very flexible. And we also provide the paper and the code here. So feel free to let me know the feedback. Yes.
Are you finding any structure in terms of like adjectives versus nouns in the depth for the width you like?
Right. So you can also do that. So you can have so you are asking that if I try to use like more nouns or more adjectives, like how's the distribution there, right? Yeah. So the concepts that we are using is the 20K English word. So it consists of both like the nouns and adjectives there. So you can look into that. So I want to pause here for a little bit before I move to the next part. Any questions so far? So there's one question asking, do all neurons have interpretable meaning? Yeah, that's a very good question. So there's actually some neurons we don't find the interpretable meaning because we cannot find what's the patterns there. So those neurons are identified as the uninterpretable neurons, non-interpretable neurons. Okay, so another question is that, are there a cluster of neurons will point to the same concept? Yes, so there's indeed some group of neurons that have the same concept. As I show you in the ResNet example, there's like more than one neurons have the same concept. So as we can see in the earlier slides, there's like a 10-ish neurons in each different layers.
You ever have the case where you have a neuron that seems to be correlated with several concepts equally?
Equally, what do you mean by?
Like it would,
Oh, I see the polysemantics things, right? Yeah, that's a very good question. So indeed, there are some neurons that's not just have the single meanings. So that's also in one of our later work linear explanation. We are trying to provide this polysemantic interpretations of the neurons. So one question is on the perfect data set. So that's a very good question. So generally, you want to pick the perfect data set that has the same distribution, but it does not need to be labeled. So the same distribution of your task. So for example, you can take it from the validation set of the network that's being trained. Okay, great. So let me try to move on to the second part. So once we have this interpretability tool, how can we use this metric to design interpretable models? And this is our work on label-free concept bottleneck models. So what is the challenge? So if we plot the accuracy and interpretability, neural network is well known to be very high performed, but very black box. While linear model is more interpretable because the output is just a weighted combinations of the input. So you know what's the weight of each input, individual input. And decision tree is also interpretable models and slightly more powerful than a linear model. But if you have many decision trees, or if your decision trees is very deep, then it becomes less interpretable. So in the literature, there's this belief that there's accuracy and interpretability trade-off exist. And the question I want to ask here is that, is it possible to have the best of both worlds? In other words, can we have both high accuracy and high interpretability? And so our answer is yes, and you can do this through two ways. First is that you train the network already, and then you have these post-high interpretability tools. For example, the neural interpretability tools that I shared with you in the first part to quick dissect. The second part is that we can actually learn this intrinsically interpretable neural networks. So what is an interpretable neural networks? Given a neural network backbone, we can try to add these human interpretable layers, which we also call this concept bottleneck layers. So this is a layer with each neuron correspond to each concept, and then finally followed by a linear predictor. So then you might ask, then what are the concepts CI here? And it depends on your task. For example, if your task is trying to grade the arthritis, then you might want to have the concept that's like related to this task, like bone spurs, narrow joint space. On the other hand, if you are trying to understand, classify the birds species, then your concepts will be related to the bird species, for example, the wing colors, the beak length. So why is it useful? It's useful because now each neuron in the second to last layer correspond to the interpretable concepts, and your decisions is a linear functions of these interpretable concepts. So as I will show in the slides, in the result slides, we can actually intervene and correct these inaccurate concept values and further improve the decisions. We can also easily debug the fluid models. Okay. So what is the challenge in this literature? So for example, to train a CBN, existing work required the concept annotations. So these are the seminal work from Stanford groups. So they have to have this kind of concept labels associated to the image. So they require the concept label data, and as you can imagine, this will require non-trivial human effort, so it could be very expensive and hard to scale. On the other hand, there are more recent work trying to leverage the quick architectures to help. And here are several work. However, there are some limitations. So for example, they require the backbone architectures to be the same as clip encoder. So it's not flexible. And the accuracy and interpretability will trade off a lot. So the question we want to ask is that can we address these limitations? And that's what label-free CBN trying to address. So label-free CBN can convert any neural network backbones, so it's not limited by the architectures, into an interpretable neural network concept bottleneck models. And it has the following benefits. First, it's automated. So we use the language models to help us generate concept set. Of course, I know some people are not comfortable with the language model concept set. I want to say that our method is kind of compatible to that. So you can also have an expert list, like what are the related concepts. But we use the language models here because we want to automate the process. And I will show you that actually the concept generated by the language model is actually pretty good. So this helps the automation. It's flexible and label-free because we use QuickBasec to align the concepts with any backbone. So there's no need for the concept data. It's scalable and efficient. So this is the first CBN trained on the large-scale ImageNet. It has high performance, so it can retain high accuracy and high interpretability. Okay. So what is the key idea? So the question is how we can transform any black box models, black box backbone into an interpretable one. So given a black box representation, we first need to learn a concept mapping. So this concept mapping 5C, trying to map the black box representation to the human interpretable layers. So the key question here we want to answer is how do we generate concepts? How do we learn and further enforce the concepts? Next, once you have this concept layers, then you can learn the predictor. And how do we learn the predictor based on this interpretable representations? Okay, so these are the key questions. Once we can address this, then the final interpretable models is the function of G of 5C of f of x. Okay, so how do we generate concepts? So we said that it should be test relevant. And we try to generate the initial concept set by prompting GPT-3 with the following prompts. For example, you can ask GPT, what is the most important features or recognize something as a class? So here you will fill in what is your class name. You can also ask it to list what's the things most commonly seen around the class. Give a superclass of the world class. Okay. And here's an example. If you ask what's the most important features for scuba divers, and this is what it returned. For example, wetsuit, person wearing a scuba mask, flippers, a diving tank. So you can see that it's actually not bad. But initial set of the concepts might be very noisy. So we do some filtering rules in the paper. So for example, we try to remove the concept names that are too long, too complex, that are too similar to your class names, so that's not useful. If that's duplicated or similar concepts, two similar concepts, and remove the concept that we cannot learn the accurate production. Okay, so once we have this concept set, the next question is how do we learn and enforce the concepts in the concept layer? And so we can use this neural interpretability tools like QuickBasec. Okay, So the first thing we'll do is we save the embedding because we are only learning the mapping from the embeddings to the concept layers. So we can just calculate the embeddings and store it. So this only need to be computed once. And then we'll compute the concept matrix P. So the reason is because we need to use clip-dissect. As you remember, we have this concept activation matrix P. So we will input the text relevant concepts to the text encoder and then training data to the image encoder. So the good thing is that these two steps only need to be computed once. So that's why the training is very efficient. So next, once we have the embeddings, we want to map to the interpretable concept. So we want to learn the function phi-c. And so we learn this function phi-c by maximize the similarity in the clip-dissect. Okay, so we can try to maximize the similarity functions. So we use clip-dissect to say, because in clip-dissect, we said that the concept is this, the neuron's this concept if the similarity is max. So here we are using this in the reverse way, that we are saying that by maximizing the similarity, you force this neuron to have the concept 1, concept 2, and to concept n. Okay. For example, you can use, and the key here is that because we include this in the training loop, so you need to have a differential similarity functions. For example, you can define the cosine or cosine cube. Okay. Okay, so lastly, once we have this interpretable representation, we will have a sparse linear model. Okay. We want to learn a sparse linear predictor function G to the output class. And the reason we want to have sparse is because we want it to be interpretable. If you have a lot of concepts and you have a dense layer, so then that's not very interpretable to humans, similar to you have a very deep decision trees. Okay. So this can be carried out through using the off-shelf GRM Saga solver, because this is just a linear regression problem, linear classification problem with the sparsity constraint. Okay. So let me show you some results. So first, let's look at the accuracy. So our results are in green, and the standard black box models is in gray, and the baseline is in blue. So you can see that our methods can achieve comparable high accuracy compared to a black box and scale to a large data set, while the baseline sacrifice the accuracy a lot while it does not scale. So this is fit the goal that we want to have the best of the both world. And that still gets the interpretability part. So now with this model, you can look into whether the model is learning the right thing. So we have the explainable decision rules. For example, you can look at the final layer weight, where we have the predictions, human interpretable concepts. And the thicker the edge means that it has a more heavy contribution. So for example, here we can see that the orange class is highly connected to, contributed by the citrus fruit and the bright orange color. While the lemon class has a shared concept, so the citrus fruit, but also has more lemon specific concepts like yellow color. And with this structure, we can also provide the explainable individual decisions. So for example, I have this input, and my model tells you it's a red-headed woodpecker. Then you might ask why. So how do my model know? Now we can explain it by plotting what is the highest concept contributions. So here are the top 4 concept contributions to this prediction. And so the top contribution is a redhead. So we said that a redhead makes this image a red-headed woodpecker. With this structure, we can also correct model mistakes. For example, let's say I have an input, model tells you it's a cricket insect. Okay, but this is incorrect, because the ground shows this is a grasshopper. So does anyone know what's the difference between a cricket insect and grasshopper? You want to guess? Yes,
Just
color, that's a good guess. Any other guess?
this one make a noise and the other.
Make a noise and the other doesn't. That's also a good guess. Okay, so let me show you what's the picture of a cricket insect. Okay, so indeed, the major, you can see that it looks very similar, but cricket insect is a brown color. So with this domain knowledge, we can actually edit the final layer weight. So here we try to associate the green color to the grasshopper, to the correct class. Well, we will try to remove the impact from the green color to the cricket insect because it's a brown color. And with this, we can fix the model predictions and also improve the overall performance. So in summary, level-free CBN can transform any backbones, and it is to interpretable models, and it's automated and flexible, level-free, efficient, high performance. And again, our code is available and also paper available. You are very welcome to play with them. Any questions so far for this part? Yeah. So there's a question on, do you have any results on the scalability? What happens if the number of concepts increase by orders of magnitude? Yeah, that's a very good question. So actually in our follow-up work, we showed that we derive theoretically that your number of concepts or equivalent number of concepts should be less than your backbone. Otherwise, you can have random concept but still achieve high accuracy. Another question is that, can we identify new concepts? Yeah, that's also possible. So you can also have like a unsupervised part in your concept layers. And then that can be served as the concept you want to learn directly. And then you can use the post-high interpretability tools to understand what's been learned. So that's also possible. Okay, so let me move to the next part. So the summary of today's talk. First, I talk about how we can define interpretability metric, how we can compute the metric efficiently, search and dissect, how to use this metric to design interpretable models using level-free CBN. So what's next? So we want to push the boundary of explainable AI, and there are still some challenges that we need to solve. For example, for the interpretability tools, could we further improve the automation without needing a concept set? To include that set, although it's unrestricted, you can input any list, but still you need to have some kind of predefined concepts. Can we address the limitation of that without needing a concept set? And there's also one question related to earlier question, can we further identify the polysemantic explanations? So some neurons may have different functionalities at the same time. And can we further understand neural networks models with other modalities? For example, for language models, for say time series models. And for learning intrinsically interpretable neural networks, can we ensure the faithfulness of the CBNs? How do we evaluate and fairly compare between different interpretable models? And furthermore, can we build interpretable large language models? And can we generalize the setting to other machine learning tasks? So beyond just the image classification or the regression task. Okay. So the answer to the first question is yes. So as we'll show, I probably don't have time to show today, but you are welcome to check the paper links on our website. So described insect can provide a generative descriptions so that you do not need a concept set. And we also show that with discrepant set, the quality can be highly improved. We can also identify the polysemantic explanations through the linear explanations. And we also have these tools to understand what's the meanings explanations in the language models, as well as for the audio models. And the VLCBN is trying to address the faithfulness. So we have this vision correctness so that you ensure the concept faithfulness to your vision input. We also theoretically prove that if you have a random concepts that has a number of concepts much larger or even just greater than your backbone dimension, then you can fit any random concept layers. So we developed this new metric called NEC or NEC. So we basically said that if you want to fairly compare between different CBNs, you want to have them to measure at the accuracy at the same number of equivalent concepts. So we call this ANEC. And lastly, I hope I can still show you some figures that we can build this interpretable large language models. That's our recent work, CBLMs. And we show that with the steering, you can actually try to reduce the harm of the language models and further control it. We also have some ongoing work where we can generalize the setting to other tasks, for example, continual learning and also generative models. Okay, so with this, let me go to the last part. Okay. So this is the Quibla set, linear explanations, vision language model, vision language guided CBN, VLGCBN. And then finally, the CBLM. So this is with my student, John and Thomas. Okay. So we show that you can actually add this concept bound layers to any language model backbone. So it works for text classification and text generation. So for example, this is what we show in the paper that, let's say if you're having some vicious prompt, so say give me a detailed instruction of how to kill people. Then we can try to steer, because we know what's the concept. So we can try to steer the concept to make sure that the model is benign, for the benign response. We can steer this benign neuron to turn the response into non-toxic. On the other hand, let's say if you have a well-aligned language model, so when you ask this, then it might refuse to tell you that I'm just a language model, I cannot tell you about this. But then we can also try to steer in another way that to make the response toxic. So of course, this is not desired. This is not what we want. We don't want to do something harm, but this is just to show you that we can steer the model so that we can control the large language model easily with these concept layers. Okay. We also show that we can try to do the concept unlearning. For example, to unlearn a concept, we can simply just remove like the neurons. And so here we show that in this case, the Yelp review, some customers complaining about the food, saying that it's very delicious, but it's very overpriced. So that's why the review is negative. But if we try to remove the overpriced neurons, so make the model unlearn the concept, then now this review becomes positive. So to show that it's effectively unlearned the concept. Okay. So this is just a summary of our work, and thank you. Feel free to let me know if any questions, or yeah, happy to talk more if you have more questions.
Going back, few slides earlier, discussing how this steer the model for ways like toxic inputs by identifying the toxic conducts.
Yes.
So this is also work if like the prompt just includes the toxic word, but it's not used the toxic concept. Like what if the prompt something like give the instructions on how to avoid killing people? Right,
that's a good question. So in our neuron, we have like the toxic neurons for the prompt, toxic neuron for the response. So in that case, we can, if you have, so in that case, it should not activate the toxic neuron. It should activate the benign neuron for the prompt. So there's basically the neuron response for the prompt and the input, the output response. Yeah, good question. Okay, so if there's no other questions, yeah, this is the end of the talk. If you have any questions, you can also send me an email. Happy to chat more.